everyone is talking classic rock these days. More specifically, they're talking about the Queen movie, Bohemian Rhapsody. And it's just so awesome that so many people are talking about Queen and remembering the great Freddie Mercury. And we've talked about Queen here before on Rebel Force Radio because, yes, there is a Star Wars tie-in to Queen, Jason.
There is. One of my favorite songs, I think that made the Greatest Hits Volume 2. Can't remember if it's Volume 1 or Volume 2. But certainly it's on the Greatest Hits roster, and that is the tune Bicycle Race.
Yes. Yeah. And in that song, Freddie actually references two of the huge blockbusters of the 70s. Bicycle Race, of course, was originally on the Jazz album in 1978. But he references not only Star Wars, but Jaws as well. So you have the Lucas-Spielberg rivalry continuing, the friendly rivalry, continuing in the Queen song. So we have the excerpt from the song Bicycle Race by Queen, and here's what Freddie had to say about both Jaws and Star Wars.
You say black, I say white. You say bar, I say bite. You say shark, I say hey man. Jaws was never my scene, and I don't like Star Wars.
I got to tell you, for the longest time, that really bummed me out. I'm a big fan of Queen, and I'm one of those that discovered Queen later. I think there was Jim, you and I were talking about this a little bit off air, that Queen was enormously popular in the States, but probably more in the UK than in the States during their reign in pop music. But of all things, it was the Wayne's World movie back in the early 90s that brought Bohemian Rhapsody and Queen sort of back into the spotlight. And that's when I discovered them. I was in junior high school. And then just before that, Freddie, it wasn't that long before that Freddie had passed away untimely. That was during the, when everybody was learning about what was going on with the AIDS virus. He was one of probably the more famous folks to suffer and die from that disease. And so between the Wayne's World movie and Freddie's passing and people starting to really pass around that Live Aid performance that sort of just was kind of a huge moment in the life of the band, that's when I really discovered Queen for me. And I think it's great that people are rediscovering it. But I have to say, it was always very bittersweet when I would hear that song and I'd hear it and say, hey man, Jaws was never my thing and I don't like Star Wars. How could you not like Star Wars, Freddie? You're so cool. And but so is there any truth to it? Is there any truth to it?
Jaws was never my scene and I don't like Star Wars. And so, a lot of people point their blasters toward Freddie and say, what are you saying? You don't like Star Wars? How dare you? And this was like at the peak of the Star Wars cultural big splash of the latter half of the 70s, 1978, Star Wars was a pop culture freight train at that point. And so for Freddie to make this statement, and Jaws too, come on, Jaws was never my scene. Well, we're talking about swimming in the ocean with killer sharks. Never quite my scene either, Freddie. But if we're talking about movies, and I brought this up to James Burns from JediNews.co.uk out at Rancho Obi-Wan. And I said, hey, man, are you excited to go see Bohemian Rhapsody? And he's like, I actually would have been at the UK premiere, but I'm out here for the Rancho Gala. I was like, wow, man. That's amazing. Because actually, we were talking about this before the show, but James has a connection with Brian May from Queen because it's known that Brian May is a big Star Wars fan, the lead guitarist for Queen.
Big collector.
And he
big
collects.
Into the toys, yeah.
And so we think that James and Brian made a connection because James, for the longest time, had the biggest Star Wars website in the UK. Probably still does. I don't know. I don't know who's keeping track of that stuff, but somehow they made a connection. That's something that we should ask James. It's like, how did you make a connection with Brian May? But I asked him about this, and I said, well, what about Freddie? You know, Freddie didn't like Star Wars. And James said, no, you don't understand. And Brian has talked to me about this before. Freddie is a character in that song, Bicycle Race. He's not singing he's not laying out an autobiography. He's being a character. And it's not a reflection on him as a person. And actually, Freddie really liked Star Wars a lot. But I can't just take James's word for it, so I looked it up on Wikipedia, which is always a dicey thing anyway. But, I mean, here's what Wikipedia had to say. Brian May has said that the song was not an autobiographical portrait of Mercury and that Mercury did not particularly enjoy bicycling. Also noting that despite the lyrics, Mercury was a Star Wars fan. So but we do have evidence of that because of the photos that have been floating around on the internet lately. They've been out there for a long time, but now they're back up in our face with Bohemian Rhapsody, #1 at the box office. There are these great photos of a Star Wars character making a cameo during Queen performances in the 80s. Have you seen these?
You know, I couldn't believe it when I was looking at the show rundown this week because a friend of mine at work sent me this. This is a story that's been making the rounds because, as you said, Jim, the Bohemian Rhapsody movie and everyone's sort of rediscovering Freddie Mercury's his genius and his just way over the top style. But there's a photo that's been making the rounds of Freddie Mercury wearing a Flash Gordon t-shirt and a pair of very skimpy, black leather shorts, riding atop the shoulders of someone wearing a Darth Vader mask and sporting sort of I guess you can say a Darth Vader costume. It's a little. Doesn't look. This is not screen accurate. Let's just put it that way.
It's bootleg.
Yeah, totally bootleg. It's like he's riding an Uze action figure here almost. But he's riding atop the shoulders of this Darth Vader character, and the photographer is a guy named Tom Callens, and he has been talking about this photo. And if you've seen it, you can't forget it, so you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't seen it, just Google it. But Tom said...
Prime time Freddie Mercury with the mustache. So they're on the tour for the game. He's wearing the Flash Gordon t-shirt, so obviously they were performing numbers from that movie soundtrack, which they did. And so that would be 1980. I think the game and Flash came out around the same year, so 1980.
Yeah.
And Google is my friend here. Flash Gordon movie, release date of 1980. So, okay. Mm-hmm. So they're touring on, they're writing the back of 2 albums, Queen, The Game, which really was a huge hit for Queen. It had Another One Bites the Dust. It had Crazy Little Thing Called Love. Just a great album. I owned it on vinyl, along with the Flash Gordon soundtrack, which I owned on 8-track. So why I wasn't at this show, who knows? I didn't start going to concerts, like big-time concerts, until a few years after this.
So you never saw Queen in person,
oh, no.
then?
No, I was only 11 when they were on the tour for the game. And, of course, they kept out there on the road, and I just never, I guess I just never was a big enough fan of Queen to really feel compelled to go see them. A lot of people feel they jumped the shark in the mid-'80s when they did that one album, Radio Goo Goo, Radio Gaga.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like, "Oh no, what happened to Queen?" But you know what? There was an album they put out in 1990. I remember listening to when I was in college and enjoying very much. But I never had the opportunity to see them perform live. And that's unfortunate. But here's Freddie. He's on stage with Darth Vader. And the famous internet photo, according to AV Club, was taken at a Queen concert in Houston during the 1980 tour for the game. And the photographer says it was during the encore and it was during We Will Rock You. Yes. And he came out sitting on Darth Vader's shoulders. Yeah. Right?
Yeah, that's how I picture it. He says, I guess it was a shtick he did on that tour, because I've seen other photos of other shows. I'm sure it was a roadie that they hired, or maybe everybody just thought it was so funny. So Freddie was over the top. He was so over the top. I'm sure it was a roadie that they hired, or maybe a bodyguard. I guess you had to be a pretty bulky guy to carry Freddie around. So the Darth Vader shtick seemed to only be short-lived, and it was very quickly replaced by Superman, which of course was another big film.
Because I think they got a call from the Lucasfilm lawyers.
Well, they may have, because back then especially there was no 501st back then.
Oh no,
that wasn't a member of the garrison. That was like I said, that was a walking Uze figure.
A few years later, Neil Young went on tour with Crazy Horse, and their roadies were dressed like Jawas. And they got the old cease and desist from Lucasfilm Limited on that one as well.
Well, I remember, growing up as a kid in the 80s, and it was, I can't remember if they were the Oakland Raiders at the time or the L.A. Raiders, but either way, that was one of the things I loved about Sunday football was if it was a Raiders game, you would hear that Imperial March, and there were always people in the stands dressed as Star Wars characters, particularly Darth Vader or Stormtroopers.
Until...
I think George Lucas gonna sue somebody.
Yeah. And then you get the letter.
Yeah,
but
right.
So Freddie, he must have had an affinity for Star Wars if he's going to be riding around on Darth Vader's shoulders during the encore of We Will Rock You, during that great Queen the Game tour / Flash Gordon tour from 1980. Boy, to go back in a time machine and be at one of those concerts. Woo!
Yeah.
Amazing. Just to wrap things up, we do have, in Star Wars and pop culture, we have a Star Wars Queen song parody mashup, courtesy of the students and faculty of the digital video program at the University of Advancing Technology in Tempe, Arizona. And you can check them out at uat.edu. And they did a really clever mashup, Bohemian Rhapsody, Star Wars edition. You can see the video on YouTube. We have a couple excerpts here. This is part of the digital video program at University of Advancing Technology in Tempe, Arizona. How do you guys fit that on your T-shirts? But here they are. Yeah, let's take a listen.
Jabba just captured Han, took him down without a fight, and now he's frozen carbonite. Well, Jabba, Luke Skywalker's come to free his friends and take them all away. Jabba,
I love it.
didn't mean to kill Rancor. If R2 does not see my secret signal, Leia, take that chain and choke him.
Oh, sorry, we had a little YouTube interference here.
Oh, sorry. And then we have another excerpt from the song. Of course, I was just looking for the thing that sort of summed it all up, and I couldn't just pick one part of the song, and I didn't want to play the whole song here on the show. Go see the music video to hear the whole thing. But I did want to pull that part that was made famous by Wayne's World, where they're all doing the high falsettos, and then they keep singing, and it builds up into the big guitar riff, the big guitar power chords there, and everyone headbangs. So I had to take that part out of the song. So here it is again, Queen, Bohemian Rhapsody, Star Wars edition from the university out there in the town. I'm not going to say that mouthful of a name.
Let's go.
I see a little silhouette of a green man. Master Yoda, will you raise up my X-Wing? Force of the lightning, very, very frightening me. Obi-Wan, Jedi Master. I'm just a slave boy, crayons come to free me. He is a chosen one from the prophecy. Spare him his life from this captivity. Easy come, easy go, why don't let me go? I will not let you go. Let him go. I will not let you go. Let him go. I will not let you go. Let me go. Never let you go. Let me go. Never let me go. Oh, mama shmia, mama shmia. Lord God, Regina's an apprentice put aside for me, for me, for me.
Everyone headbang.
Yes, yes.
So James Burns is with us now. James?
Hello, sir. How are you?
Great. Listen, I won't take up much of your time, but I'm really happy to hear that you actually heard the show last week.
I always listen.
And you wrote me back and said we got almost everything right when we were talking about Queen. So I figured, hey, let's get you on the show and we could talk a little bit about it because there were some questions about you and your connection to Queen. We mentioned last week on the show that you've gotten to know Brian May over the years, and so I'm just curious how that connection was made.
So I have to blame my wife for this.
Okay.
Back in 2004, Brian was doing a lecture, a one-off lecture at Hatfield University, which is not far from London at all. And we got tickets to go, and it was a rather intimate affair, only 300 or 400 people, so very different to what Brian and Queen are used to playing. And it was just going to be a 45-minute talk. And Hatfield from where we live is 5 miles away, so it was a no-brainer. We were definitely going to go. So we got tickets. And unbeknownst to me, Sarah had spoken to Brian's PA to arrange a meeting after the event. So we turn up at this show, and we just thought Brian was going to be giving a lecture for 45 minutes. After a 2-hour show where he talked for about 45 minutes and played for just over an hour, we went backstage, and I had a 15-minute chat with Brian.
Wow.
And which was amazing. One-on-one, had photos, he signed some stuff for me. It was pretty incredible. And we hit it off over this thing called Star Wars. And he gave me his contact information, which was an email. And over the years, we just conversed a little over email. And then he would send me tickets for Sarah and I to go and see We Will Rock You, the show that was on in town. And occasionally concert tickets would come through and other bits and pieces. And we just conversed that way. And since the show's unfortunately ended in the West End, we haven't really connected that often. But every now and again, especially, sort of this time of the year, when it gets to Christmas, I'll shoot him an email and he'll respond. So it's really nice. It's a nice, it's a very cordial relationship. I asked him what he thought of the films because he went to the premiere of The Force Awakens, and I asked him what he thought of that, and he came back with a response. So it's, it's really quite nice.
So what did he think?
He really liked it. He thought it was, he genuinely thought it was a great film. And he went with his wife, Anita Dobson, who is famous, especially in the UK, for EastEnders. And they've been married for 30 years or longer. I mean, it's a crazy showbiz marriage that's really lasted, which is unusual these days.
So you are a big Queen fan, but how did the connection with you and Brian happen over Star Wars?
Well, I knew that in the early 2000s he was gifted, or he obtained, the Compulsion Gallery statues. These are like the huge pewter statues that I think were limited to 2,500 pieces each of C-3PO, R2-D2, Vader, and Boba Fett. And that was reported widely in the press. Mm-hmm. So I asked him, I asked him outright about Star Wars, and he said, yes, I'm a collector, and he collects bits and pieces. And we just got into it that way. And then I was able to ask him other questions. And he's a very, very down-to-earth guy. He doesn't He doesn't like signing autographs for people, which I found out fairly early on. He'd much rather have a conversation with you and just get to know you a little bit, because he doesn't feel that he wants his signature to be sold on eBay.
Right.
You know, he'd rather have a conversation with you and get to know you and get to know a little bit about you. And he's very personable like that. And it's funny because, you know, you look around at George and some of the other people that we know and we've met through this crazy fandom that we're involved in. There's a lot of people like that. There's a lot of people that would, you know, prefer to actually have a conversation with you than scribble on a piece of paper.
Right on. I'm looking at some of these compulsion gallery metallic sculptures that Brian is so fond of collecting. Oh, here's a picture of Brian with them.
There was a picture from him, I think from 2001.
Wow.
2002.
There he is. Yeah, and he's posing with Darth Vader, R2, 3PO, and Boba Fett. And those are really cool. So he's a big fan then, huh? I mean,
yes.
Are you familiar with Brian collecting anything other than these metallic sculptures?
I know he's got some action figures. I don't know how many he's got. And, you know, I've often joked about getting together and coming over to see what he's got. But he's never taken me up on the offer yet. So I'm working on it. I keep dropping it into conversations, into emails.
Well, if you get a hold of him, bring him onto the show here and we could talk to him, because that would be
I
cool.
would love to do that. Absolutely. I mean, do you remember years ago we did those spotlight shows where we talked about, where we spoke to collectors about what they did and why they collected?
Yes.
I mean, to do a show like that with somebody as huge as Brian, to talk about the things he collects and why he collects, would be amazing.
That would
you know, but Brian's no stranger to space. You know, he's got a PhD in astronomy. He's a very, very keen watcher of the skies. So I'm not surprised he likes Star Wars.
No.
It sort of fits.
Now, the big question has been, though, because of the lyrics in Bicycle Race, a lot of people have assumed Freddie is not a Star Wars fan because he says right there in the song, I don't like Star Wars.
I said, hey man, George was never my scene, and I don't like Star Wars.
So we talked a little bit about this when I saw you at Rancho Obi-Wan a few weeks ago. But what's your, why don't you tell everyone what your take is on that lyrical decision?
Yeah, I mean, it's very similar to what you said last week on the show, which was, this was, you know, whenever they sang a song, it was very much, you know, talking about them outside of the box, if that makes any sense. And it wasn't exactly what they felt. They were throwing a personality or a different personality onto the song. And, you know, a lot of times when you're writing lyrics, and, you know, I'm sure your son knows, and other people listening, you need to find words that fit into the song. And I think to choose Jaws and Star Wars at the time, obviously, you know, two huge hits, and obviously very much playing on their minds as they're recording songs, and maybe they went to watch the films because I'm sure they needed a bit of downtime from the studio. So it's no surprise that they crop in, because they were such huge hits all over the world. So no matter where they were recording at that point, I'm sure they would have played, you know, a pivotal role in anything that was going on around them.
I get it, but why the need to be negative? Why can't he say Jaws is my scene and I love Star Wars?
Love Star Wars.
He can still ride a bicycle if he does that. He can still ride a bike.
It's a bit of fun, isn't it? It's playing around with lyrics and just having some fun with it. And, you know, as you reported, you know, later on tour, Freddie came out on top of Darth Vader and stuff like that. And I don't think there was any malice in it at all. It was all, you know, good-natured, and especially when they went then to record the Flash Gordon soundtrack. That's right. Which obviously was inspired by Star Wars. I don't think we necessarily would have had that film without Star Wars. So, yeah, I don't think there was anything in it at all. And I'm sure if the late great Freddie was still around today, we could pose the question directly to him.
Yeah, or maybe he'd even be spotted at the Force Awakens premiere or something like that. But cool. Unfortunately, we lost him way too soon, and a lot of people have Freddie on their minds with Bohemian Rhapsody in the theaters now and still performing very strong. Last weekend at the box office, it charted up at number 2 behind the new Grinch movie. But have you seen it? And if you did, what'd you think of it?
Yep, I saw the film when I got back from San Francisco, and I was really, really pleased with it. I think it told a really, really good story of what the band went through. Obviously, it's very difficult to to go through everything in a 2-hour film. But it was nice. I felt that I wanted more, but I think you can feel like that a lot when you go to cinema these days. There's always more to tell. There's always a lot more in between that isn't necessarily portrayed on screen. But I think they did a great job, and it's taken a long time to bring the film to fruition. And I think everyone that's seen it has gone out and started listening to Queen records again, which is really, really nice.
Yeah.
Earlier in the year, Queen went on tour with Adam Lambert, and even then, whilst on tour in Antwerp, Brian May compared going into the stadium at Antwerp to the opening of Star Tours. So even and he even put a video up on Instagram of it. He said, this is just like riding Star Tours. So in everything he's doing, Star Wars, it can't be too far from his mind to make that sort of jump.
Right. And when you're a Star Wars fan like we are, you never have Star Wars too far away from your thoughts. So,
no.
So Brian definitely showing some serious fandom cred with a statement like that. Any sort of reference to Star Tours is good by me. But so that's great. Well, so bottom line, Freddie Mercury, we can safely assume, was a Star Wars fan.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, James Burns, thanks again for checking in and giving us your Queen update here on Rebel Force Radio.
I'm just a slave boy. I got no place to be. And so I